Let's talk about codependency. So, codependency is an unhealthy pattern through which an individual derives their identity or their value, worth, self esteem from something external. Let's say, be a label, a qualification, job, material aspects, owning things, house, car, achievements, their abuse. Sometimes it can be negative too. Sometimes it can be materialistic. Sometimes it can be just association with certain groups, certain teams, certain fan bases, certain sports, certain religion, certain locality. Okay, there's nothing wrong in trying to build a personality or a sense of self that has all aspects of this. But if you are solely and very critically assigning the value of who you are or your inner worth to something outside of you, so much that without it you just cannot even derive your identity, that's codependency. On a very deep level, that is what it is. Usually people try to limit it to relationship point of view, where the codependency is something that you cannot have your role in a relationship without in reference in with other person or other people in it, like a typical romantic relationship. There are people who are chronically in relationships all the time because they just cannot stand to be single or alone. They cannot, and they have to, their self-esteem, somewhere their confidence or their own image of who they are falls apart. So they have to keep finding themselves somebody for the sake of it. And then the most common pattern, damaging pattern, is it's not even have to do with relationships. Long before that, our backgrounds, financial status, socioeconomic status, our education, jobs, material aspects, owning things. So people get so carried away by all these things that they make those external aspects, labels, become who they are. Now what happens is it limits you, it feeds your ego temporarily, and especially when your ego is so shallow, not a deep sense of healthy ego. Healthy ego is essential to keep the identity, self-image, who we are together. It's essential, definitely, but it has to be healthy as well. What do I mean by that? As in, it has to come from the inherent knowing of who we are. And the healthy ego also doesn't feel the need to dominate or announce itself to others constantly in the name of I am this, I am that. Do you know who I am? Most of us would have heard this kind of sentences in some context or the other. People who get so carried away by their labels and superstar status and their identities attached to their qualifications and earning and the company they work for and their salary is so much, and the building they own and how much it cost for them, the car or the house or the property or the dress, the labels, the brands, all these material things. They get so carried away and engulfed in it that without these they do not function. They cannot even have a sense of acceptance of who they are. That's unhealthy ego. So this unhealthy ego tries to either play the victim because you're too weak, you need somebody else to take care of you, you need somebody else to depend on, you need somebody else, or something else. So you put yourself in situations that feeds this false fragile ego that needs constant fuel. That is why it's a pattern, it's a destructive pattern. It has to keep going on. It cannot stand alone on its own. That's unhealthy ego. And then there are people who are chronically obsessed by the labels and the material things and other things to an extent that without them they are nothing. And so some kind of an insult to the place of their birth, to their job, to their salary, to their superficial life will create a huge ego injury, that they feel the need to dominate, control, destroy the other person, because how dare you? How dare you speak that something that is so important to me is not important to you? That's unhealthy ego. It's not healthy. Healthy ego is capable of sustaining itself without feeling the need to overly depend on somebody for anything and everything, because its fuel comes from a healthy structure of who they are, and it has healed aspects. It is not based on trauma, it is not based on broken childhood, it is not based on social conditioning that tells them that this is who you are, that is how you should be, otherwise you are wrong or bad or all that. And material aspects, getting carried away by your qualifications and earnings and salaries and physical beauty and material things so much that you think, or you believe that the other person owes you something, that you somehow are in the higher echelons of the society and other people are on the lower echelons, so somebody should serve you beneath you. And then there are people who are willingly to be in the beneath powerless position because it feeds their false ego of, oh, I am the poor old me, the self-pity ones, the martyr-based self-sacrificing ones who think, oh, I am the good one who is always trying to do good for others, but I have absolutely zero identity of who I am. Because you take away all these references where I'm giving constantly, feeding the false ego, and you take away all those references and you shatter, you fall apart, you don't know who you are, because without referencing to those external things, you have no identity. That's a fragile ego, that's a damaged ego, it's not a healthy ego. Healthy ego is complete. It doesn't feel need to dominate or put themselves in self-victimizing, self-destructive patterns, harming themselves or sabotaging themselves, lying, negative self-talk, lying to themselves. These are all products of unhealthy ego, because their self itself is coming from all sorts of wrong sources. To hold it together, there is no enough solid strength, inner spiritual strength in them, that they have to derive all these confirmations of how valuable or important or worthy they are from external sources. As many external sources as possible. The body image, self-image, work, education, intelligence, the looks, the societal acceptance of who you are. How do you fit into those labels and dynamics and roles that society forces on you? How are you deriving your identity from how many people compliment you, or how many people give you attention, or how much service you do, or how many accomplishments, and how much money, how much powerful, how many people who are powerful you know? These things become the self-conforming cycles that you never pay attention to the inside aspects of who you are. You completely ignore. You keep feeling this emptiness because you're feeding the wrong ego. You're feeding the superficial, fragile ego that could fall apart any moment. And it needs constant feeding, and you use external resources to feed that ego. And it never really helps, because it's coming from a very unhealthy place and an unclear sense of self, and not knowing that inherent worth is there. Healthy self-esteem doesn't require any of those external things that you're chasing after. Those things doesn't have to feed you, feed your ego, feed your confidence, feed your self-esteem, feed your soul, feed you who you are. No, they don't have to. They are there for a purpose, yes, but that is all there is to it. They are there in everybody's life, be it job, education, money, struggles, comforts, the good, bad and ugly. Okay, but if you want to rely too much on those external labels and aspects and feed your false ego, you are ultimately going to damage yourself and the people around you, thinking that it is it is the acceptable norm. Power dynamics. There is no power dynamics necessary for a healthy person with a healthy ego. They are solid in their identity. They are grounded in the reality of who they are and what this world is and what others are. They do not feel the need for confrontation, violence, crime, violation of any kind, personal or other, spiritual, psychological, mental, emotional, financial violation of anybody, because they do not feel the need to do all those external things for others, be it even service or good and overly altruistic, overly generous. Everything has to be in moderation and limitation. Why? Anything that's overdone, just like food, you overeat, what happens? You overdrink something, what happens? You overanalyze situation, what happens? You're overly sedentary, what happens? There is a limit and a boundary, a healthy limit to everything. We know that. We have to understand that, because anything that's underdoing something and overdoing something is codependency. You want to keep your power dynamics and you are in a powerful position, so you keep other people in a powerless position. So you take more and give less with an intention to keep the dynamic going, so that the other person keeps on coming to you for pleasing, for approval, for promotion, for all these things. You're feeding onto that wrong ego. And they are doing for the sake of their false ego as well, because they cannot sustain it without that. So you are deliberately under-giving to somebody so that the other person over-gives and the dynamic becomes toxic enough that it keeps going. That's abuse, that's toxic, and that's unhealthy ego operating there, right there. You give enough and you appreciate yourself and the other person. And you willingly, you're happy to walk away when the time comes, because you're not holding on to too much. There's not much to hold on to. You are secure enough to hold on to yourself without referencing yourself to a lot of outside things, temporary materials of superficial things. Then you are operating from healthy ego point of view. You have the need to either under-attach or over-attach to scenarios and peoples and dynamics and relationships. That's false ego. That's codependency right there. Anything underdone, overdone, it's going to create a codependent dynamic. And this is what keeps the dynamic in toxic relationships going, because someone is always over-giving and telling themselves that it is okay. Someone is under-giving with an intention to abuse and extract over-giving from the other person so that they can keep the power dynamic going. Again, it's codependency. And both are coming from broken self-esteem, broken self-identity, and a wrong self-image coming from wrong places. Too much dependency on all these wrong identities, false identities and false egos and ego structures. And the more you feed onto these dynamics, the more it's going to just keep going. But there is no inherent value in those things. You're feeding the wrong place. There is nothing of value that comes out of it. So one has to realize what codependency exactly is this. This insecure, ungrounded, unstable, unsure, constantly changing, shaky, unsure sense of self and image and respect and sense of self-worth. That's the perfect breeding ground for toxicity and codependency. And as long as these are not built with healthy reflection, self-reflection, healing the wounds, looking at who we are and who we are not, be careful of what we identify with and what we do not get identify with. Do not get carried away by so many things of the physical world, the other things that constantly keep us distracted, busy, giving us all these false identities that are conflicting with in our own, when you sit in silence and in our own silence, we can always sense the uneasiness. Why? Because whatever identities were given to us through external sources, they were somehow inherently in conflict with who we are on the inside. That is why the uneasiness, the anxiety, the sadness, because it is not feeding your real self, the soul that you really are. You're letting somebody else define who you are without paying attention to who you are on the inside. That was there even before all these external labels entered your life and kept on bombarding on you. So, codependency comes from this false sense of self, this false sense of ego, false identifying of who we are and who we are not, and placing too much value in all those things, superficial labels. That's all temporary. Today they may be there, they may be gone later. They may not have the value enough to define us for who we really are in the entirety, and then we are holding on to it, and in order to hold on to it, we keep indulging ourselves in destructive, damaging patterns. Why? Because again we are coming from a broken, unhealthy ego, falseness. So authenticity is the only antidote to living in an illusion of codependency, illusion and codependency. Authenticity is the only antidote, and that requires a lot of self-work, but it is worth it.